They say independence feels like freedom until the bills start piling up. After my breakup with Amir, I thought I was finally reclaiming my life. I left with nothing but a few suitcases, a laptop, and my pride. The apartment I found wasn't much, just a one-bedroom on the third floor with creaky wooden floors and a leaky kitchen tap, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I could breathe without waiting for someone else's mood to shift the air. But freedom came at a cost. By the second month, my freelance writing gigs had dried up. 2 clients ghosted me, and another project got delayed indefinitely. I'd stretched every rupee, cutting groceries down to bare essentials, skipping lunches, and even pawning a ring my grandmother had given me. Still, the numbers didn't add up. The final blow came on a rainy Monday morning. I opened the envelope slipped under my door. A formal notice. 3 days to pay or vacate. My hands trembled as I read it again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But no, it was clear. 3 days. No exceptions. My landlord, Mr. Adil, had always been formal. Polished suits, short nods, brief conversations. He lived in the duplex below and rarely made small talk. He wasn't rude, just distant. In his late 40s, maybe early 50s, he carried himself like a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. The kind who always smelled faintly of cologne and control. I had only spoken to him twice since moving in, once about the broken intercom, and once when he handed me the keys. He didn't smile then, just said, "Don't forget the rent date." I don't like awkward conversations. Now here I was, 3 months later, praying for mercy from a man who clearly had little room for sentiment. I spent the next day spiraling. I applied for short-term gigs, messaged old clients, even considered calling my ex, not for help but to scream. The walls of my apartment felt smaller by the hour. Humiliation was a slow drip, and it was starting to drown me. By evening, I sat by the window, rain tapping rhythmically on the glass. My phone buzzed. "Mr. Adil, are you home? I'd like to speak." Downstairs in 10. My heart sank. Not a threat, not a demand, just a message with weight. I stared at the screen, unsure if I was being summoned or offered something I couldn't yet understand. Either way, I knew one thing. This wasn't going to be just a conversation about rent. And that was the moment I realized, some debts don't come in currency. When I stepped into Mr. Adil's apartment, I expected coldness, perhaps a lecture or a firm eviction warning. What I didn't expect was warmth. Dim lighting, soft music playing in the background, and the faint aroma of cinnamon tea greeted me like I was being welcomed, not warned. He gestured toward the couch. "Please sit. I thought we could talk comfortably." I nodded, cautious. My guard was up, but my circumstances had me walking a tightrope. One misstep, and I'd fall. He returned moments later with 2 cups of tea, setting one before me. "You've been going through something," he said plainly, sitting across from me. I noticed the mail piling up. "Heard you crying one night." My face flushed with embarrassment. So much for dignity. "I'm sorry," I murmured, fingers tightening around the cup. "I'll figure something out. I just need a few more days." He held up a hand. "I'm not here to evict you." That made me look up. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Look, I've been alone a long time. My marriage ended 3 years ago. Since then, I've focused on work, business, silence. But watching someone like you struggling, hurting, proud, I don't know. It stirred something in me." The air in the room shifted. He wasn't angry. He was vulnerable. Or pretending to be. "You deserve help," he said gently. "And I'd like to offer it. No rent for the next 2 months." I stared at him, stunned. "Why would you do that?" He gave a tight smile. "Maybe because I know what it's like to need someone and have no one. Maybe I don't want to be alone anymore." I couldn't tell if it was kindness or a transaction dressed in sentiment. Either way, I felt the weight of the unspoken clause. "There's no catch?" I asked slowly.
"Just dinner," he said. "Tonight."
No strings. Just company. I hesitated. My instincts screamed to walk away. But desperation dulls instincts like water dulls flame. I nodded. "Okay. Just dinner." He smiled, almost relieved. "Good. I'll order in. You like Chinese? We ate quietly, exchanging small stories, his life before the divorce, my years spent chasing freelance dreams, how hard it was to start over. There was a softness to him, a gentler man beneath the rigid exterior. But still, I felt the tightrope tighten. As I left that night, he stood by the door. You don't have to be alone in this world, he said. Not if you don't want to be. That line echoed in my head long after I returned upstairs. What he offered wasn't just rent relief. It was a comfort wrapped in control, affection laced with expectation. And I had just agreed to step into the storm. One dinner turned into 3, then 5. Before I realized it, Mr. Adil and I had slipped into a quiet routine. Takeout meals, long conversations on his balcony, and walks through the nearby park under the pretense of fresh air. He wasn't pushy. In fact, that was the most disarming part. He made it feel like I had the power, when in reality, I was floating further from shore. He shared more than I expected. About his ex-wife, his lonely evenings, his regrets. He painted himself as a man who had made mistakes but still had warmth to give, if someone was willing to receive it. I had been alone so long that even his half-hearted compliments felt like lifelines. One evening, as I handed him a cup of coffee in his kitchen, he let his fingers brush mine. A subtle touch, but deliberate. Neither of us acknowledged it. Yet everything changed after that. He began calling me dear in passing. His hand lingered at the small of my back. He told me I looked beautiful in the simplest of outfits. I didn't stop him, not because I wanted him, but because I wanted to believe I was wanted, that I mattered to someone. Then came the message from the building office. Your rent has been waived through the next quarter. No explanation. No warning. Just silence from him and a sinking feeling in my chest. It wasn't generosity.
It was ownership.
And I hated how a part of me felt relieved. That same week, I met Samir. He was different. Younger than Adil, not as polished but warm and grounded. We met at a bookstore when we reached for the same poetry collection. He laughed first, offering it to me, and before I knew it, we were sharing coffee and quoting Faiz Ahmed Freeze like old friends. Samir made me feel seen, not managed. But every time he asked about my life, I found myself dodging. I didn't tell him about the rent, or the walks with Adil, or the dinners that now ended with a quiet, loaded silence between us. Adil noticed too. He asked about my late returns, my distant smile. You've changed, he said one night. Is there someone else? I didn't answer. He didn't press. But his kindness grew colder, his gaze sharper. The warmth that once felt safe now flickered like a dying flame. I realized I had crossed a line I didn't remember drawing, and I wasn't sure how to return to myself. Guilt crept in slowly, not from what I had done, but from what I had become. And the worst part? Neither man knew the full truth. But I was starting to. It didn't take long for the illusion to crack. One rainy afternoon, I left my phone on the cafe table while I went to the counter. When I returned, Samir was staring at the screen, his expression unreadable. On it, a message from Mr. Adil blinked. You're quiet these days. Are we still us? Samir didn't speak. He simply looked at me and asked, Are you living with him? No, I said quickly. It's not like that. He waited, and I realized there wasn't a version of the truth that wouldn't sound ugly. I didn't sleep with him, I whispered. But I let him get too close. I let him think I owed him something because I couldn't afford to survive on my own. Samir nodded slowly. And what do you owe yourself? That question stayed with me long after he walked away. That night, I went downstairs for the last time. Mr. Adil opened the door, his face lit with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's been a while, he said, stepping aside. I came to say thank you, I told him. And goodbye. He stiffened. You're leaving? Yes. I gave you a home when no one else did. I met his gaze. And I gave you company when you were lonely. But it was never real. Not for me. For a moment he looked like he might argue. But then he nodded, almost to himself, and said, You'll come back. They always do. I didn't reply. I walked away. Leaving wasn't easy. I had no savings, no job lined up, and barely enough for a deposit on a shared flat across town. But what I did have was something I had nearly lost completely myself. In the weeks that followed, I found small gigs again, editing work, a few blog commissions. Not much, but enough to eat, to pay, to stand. Samir never reached out again. I didn't blame him. He deserved someone who wasn't running from her reflection. And yet, I wasn't ashamed anymore. Because I was learning. Learning that safety offered with strings isn't safety, it's a trap. That affection used as currency becomes debt. That sometimes, the rent you don't pay financially is charged to your self-worth. I still walk past that old building sometimes. His balcony light is always on. But I don't look up. I don't need to. Because I remember exactly what it cost to live under that roof.